Have you ever felt the transformative power of a familiar melody transporting you back to a cherished memory? My guest today is Stephen Hunt. He is the CEO and founder of Music Health, a company that brilliantly interweaves technology with music. He shares how music can be a beacon of hope and connection, especially for those living with dementia. Stephen's journey into this mission began with a personal passion for music. From childhood aspirations of becoming a musician to the altruistic goal of pursuing music as a therapeutic tool. Music Health's trailblazing product, Vera, is making waves internationally. The foundation of the Vera music app is deeply rooted in a personal story, as Stephen's grandfather had Alzheimer's. The lived experience and the observed challenges fueled the desire to create a solution that could make a difference in the lives of those living with the disease. This app employs AI technologies to delve deep into the tapestry of memory, retrieving invaluable moments of the past encoded in songs that stirred our emotions. With its recent launch in several countries, including Australia, Canada, and the US, Vera is on a mission to not just play songs, but to rejuvenate forgotten memories and touch the core of the human spirit, especially for those navigating the challenges of dementia. Stephen shares the vision of tech with purpose and how it's redefining the paradigm of music therapy. Today we talk about the science behind this innovation, the anthropological history of music as a healing agent, the app's tangible impact on its users as it's incorporated into daily life and can elevate the care experience. This provides meaningful benefits for both the recipients and the caregivers. Stephen shares how there has been great success working with professional caregivers in assisted living and aged care homes, along with those providing care in their home. Music is powerful, it is meaningful, it offers moments of joy, memory, and connection. And I'm honored to have Stephen Hunt here as my guest as he shares the discovery, the innovation, and the heartwarming story behind Music Health and Vera Music. Here is my interview with Stephen Hunt. Hi, Steve. I'm glad you're here. I've been looking forward to this conversation. How are you?
I'm really well, thank you, Nicole. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, I know we had a chance to visit and I had said, I was like, oh my gosh, we should hit record. It was so fun being able to talk and hear your story. And really, there's this powerful intersection of technology, music, healthcare, innovation. How did this all come to be for you?
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey that's kind of been evolving over many decades, actually. But I suppose the best place to start is the personal motivation, which actually came from my grandfather, who was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease when I was a teenager. And so I went on the journey with him over probably the best part of a decade before he eventually passed away. And I got to experience firsthand as a grandson, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
the tragedy that really is, Alzheimer's disease. But also within that, the joy that can be brought forward by engaging with music. And at the time I was an emerging musician as a teenager, and I had no idea why. I mean, my family was musical anyway. Playing music to my grandfather just kind of brought him back and soothed him, and was something he enjoyed. And so whenever we went to visit, my parents would always say, oh, make sure you pack the guitar,
Right.
he loves that. Or I'd bring the ukulele, which was actually his instrument. And yeah, it was almost something we just did because a
Mhm.
lot of the time, especially towards the end, he wouldn't necessarily remember who we were. And so playing music became just a great way to spend that time that otherwise felt sometimes a little aimless. And
Mhm.
we wanted to be there in his company, but he kind of, obviously, if he didn't remember who we were, it was sometimes felt like we were just sitting around. But music gave it purpose and made it joyful for everybody, including him. But I had no idea why. and
Yeah.
um, and when that phase of my life ended with his passing, I went and had a great career. I actually was a touring musician in the UK in my 20s, and I tried my best to be a professional musician and didn't quite get there. Although I still moonlight in a couple of bands for fun. I've got one called Lost Property, which is made up of parents from my kids' grade school.
That's
So it's just,
so good. Okay, we might need to like catch a little
Yeah, you can dig
tell
into
us where
that.
to
That's
find it.
fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, I had a really amazing career, mainly focused around digital media. So I was really chasing this idea that television had to end up coming through the internet, and I found a great career chasing the opportunity within video advertising. And this was before YouTube existed, so it was a bit early, and had went through a couple of startups on that journey. The most recent one ended up getting acquired by Adobe, so that was a really big deal. It's now called the Adobe Advertising Cloud. And at the end of that, I just kind of felt like, you know what? It's time to go back to music. And I managed to find my way into a leadership position at Universal Music Group, which is the world's biggest music company. That was incredible. I was in Australia helping to guide their digital transformation. And one of the things that I was really looking at with them was what's coming over the horizon. And we could see things like AI would generate music, and that felt scary and maybe unethical. I was really on the fence about that one. We also looked at things like virtual reality is going to become more and more pronounced. And that's something we're probably all still waiting to really see. It's still a bit expensive, but the new Apple device is, I think, the signal of what we kind of were looking at there. But then the last piece was this kind of thesis that music belonged in healthcare. And I found this really interesting because it was based on some anthropological studies looking at music actually being used in virtually every ancient human culture. So in Australia here, the Indigenous people of Australia use an instrument called the didgeridoo, and that's the oldest form of music therapy that I've come across. But then if you look at the Indigenous people of the Americas, they used wind instruments. In Tibetan monks, they still practice sound healing with bowls today. You could look at ancient Greeks, the Aztecs, the Incas. It's everybody. We ended up on this thesis that it's actually human nature to use music to heal. And a good evidence of this is just any mother in any culture will instinctively soothe her baby by singing or humming, whether she's trained musically or not. So
That's something
it's
that's
just
so,
there.
yeah, it's ingrained in
Um,
us. Wow.
it is, and it's inside all of us. But interestingly, it's not inside the healthcare system, really. I mean, we have music therapy, which is an allied health profession. It's drastically undersupplied for the demand.
Right.
And it's quite a manual thing to do and deploy. But within music therapy and within the healthcare system, there are many, many peer-reviewed journals and clinical studies that prove the efficacy of the music. But again, we just didn't really see it pervasively integrated into healthcare.
Right.
So I found that really interesting. And then also on that journey, I met my co-founder, and I was trying to meet lots of people doing interesting things in music as part of my job. And his name's Nick Johnson, and he was a former world famous DJ. He used to tour the world, and he kind of grew up in the clubs of Ibiza, funnily enough. And
That's like
but he was
Mecca for DJ, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
totally. And that's what he said. There weren't many jobs in Ibiza. You were either a DJ, a bartender, or that was about it.
Yeah.
But he was one of the world leaders in applying what we call a neural network, which is a subset of what most people would call AI. He was a world leader in applying neural networks to audio. So he developed something called the AI music brain that would listen to music as a machine. It would listen to it, but it would try to interpret it the way a human brain would. And I found that really, really fascinating. And he eventually kind of came to me with the film Alive Inside, which I'm sure many of your listeners have known. And if you haven't seen this film, you should definitely just Google search it. You can see a couple of clips. But it followed the music and memory program throughout the US, deploying personalized music experiences to people living with dementia. And it changed my life. I watched it, cried a little bit. It brought back all those memories of my grandfather. I sort of turned to my wife that night and said, I think I've got to get involved. Like, I feel very compelled. And so I went back to Nick and I said, I think that's definitely what you should do. And if you want any help, I'd love to come and join you on the journey. And so, yeah, a little bit later, we formed the company Music Health, which is what we see today. Our mission is to reinsert music into the fabric of healthcare. And we're starting with dementia. And we've developed a product called Vera, which is available now it's targeted at the caregiver of someone who's living with dementia to help them use music throughout the day.
When you had shared it with me, it's so true. You're right. Music is foundational to who we are as humans, the ability to connect with others. But you're right, it's not integrated in our healthcare system when you think about how healing and how powerful it is, or even at scale. You know, the community I worked at, we had this music therapist, and she was wonderful, but one person for, 250 residents. It's like, how do you, it's just physically not possible to be able to reach and meet everybody. And the impact, music. I remember so many times where I was visiting a woman who was a friend of mine that living with dementia, and the way we could connect and the only way I could interact with her that would pull her out of her, you could tell sadness in some ways was music, and she would start to move and dance, and that there's so much power and meaning behind that. So I'm so happy that you're doing it.
Yeah.
You're doing
And
it. Yeah.
yeah, and I do want to stress, what we're trying to do isn't to replace music therapists,
Mhm.
because it's really to support them. We try to basically transform every caregiver into a music therapist. And so we give them the tools that they need to be able to deploy music in a therapeutic sense. And then when the actual trained music therapists are in, they can actually really help guide the program. They often will look at the data that comes from our systems and find inspiration there for their own work. And we like to sort of say that, when the music therapist might come in on a weekly basis, Vera's there the rest of the time,
Yeah.
and it's something that if you had a physiotherapist come in, again,
Mhm.
probably on a weekly basis, they might help you work on some movements. And then the physiotherapist would probably say to you, now, I'd love you to do 15 minutes of this movement exercise every day, and I'll see you in a week, right? But a music therapist can come in every week, and at the moment can't really tell you to go and exercise or do that thing.
Mhm.
But now they can say, all right, we want you to play at least half an hour of Vera every day with this person, and I'm going to check the data at the end when I come back next week, and we'll see how you did. And so it kind of gives them, if they're involved, a way
Right.
to almost prescribe music,
Yeah.
and music use for the right sort of situations and for the right person. So that's kind of how we interface with music therapy. But
Mhm.
unfortunately, as I said, they're not always available or present, and so we've really built the approach and the system so that it can be administered by any caregiver. It's very, very simple. We tend to find most of our existing customers are either hospitals, we're finding really great traction there, or
Mhm.
they're aged care communities, mainly kind of assisted living into skilled nursing.
Oh, yes. We're going to talk really how the system works. But before we get into that, you had shared with me you were able to speak for TEDx Australia. And that was so cool, your story. So, if you don't mind, I'd love for you to share more about what that was like. I know you did speak about the anthropology of music a little bit in there, but it was so cool. I got goosebumps when you were telling me how it ended.
Yeah, the ending was a surprise. So it's probably for many of your listeners, it may already be published, but as we record, it is being edited. So, but if you search my name and TEDx Sydney, you'll probably find at the moment a placeholder and hopefully the actual talk, depending on when you listen to this. But it was, first of all, it was an incredible honor to be invited to speak on that stage. I'm one of those people that has I guess, a bucket list of things I'm trying to achieve in my life. And TED has been on there for over a decade.
Yeah.
And it's not been something that I've really actively pursued yet. I was kind of waiting till I had the right story and the right sort of thing to say before I went for it. And I hadn't really ever found that moment. And I've been so busy with the business that I hadn't
Mhm.
even occurred to me that I should be pursuing it for this business. But I was contacted by one of their curators who, funnily enough, was someone I'd spent many years swimming training with when I was a teenager. So going full circle back to when I was with my
Right?
grandfather,
Yeah.
was in those years like that I was actually trying to qualify for the Olympics. I was really going for it and
Mm.
swimming all the time. And this girl was on that team, so we spent many mornings and afternoons together. Anyway, so suffice to say, she's been following my journey, and she reached out and said, "Oh, we're curating the speakers for this year, and I think you could do a really great talk. Would you be interested?" And I was quite blown away and humbled by that. But I had a quick meeting with them, and they seemed to like the subject matter. But they said to me, "But how do you make this how would you make this a TED Talk?
Mm-hmm.
And how would you make this memorable? And how do you make it more than just coming up and talking? Because these days we much prefer things that are demonstrative, that, you know, the audience can experience, or that maybe there's some sort of performance element. And so I was like, oh, okay. So I had a bit of a think about those things, and I ended up coming back with a script which never changed much. We actually only changed the beginning a little bit. And but it begins with me kind of challenging the audience. So I kind of come out onto stage and I say, I bet there's a really good chance that by the end of this talk, you're going to feel noticeably better than you do right now. And it's the kind of change a pharmaceutical drug would struggle to replicate. So I kind of start off with that, and I set the scene that, hey, think about how you feel right now. I'm challenging you that by the end, you're going to feel like significantly better than you do. And so that kind of got everyone going, oh,
right,
okay.
like, what is this? Yeah.
And one of the cool things about it, actually, which you can't really know until you stand in that dot on the day, is that the audience is sort of there for a conversation. I couldn't play with that in rehearsal, but on the day I kind of did a little bit. I was sort of asking questions and getting like a group murmur back about, ooh, this or that, you know.
Yeah.
And so that was really fun. I kind of toyed with it. But yeah, then I went and explained a lot of what we just covered, like the anthropological history of music and using music to heal, being human, and kind of explained all that. I explained my grandfather's story, and then I started talking a bit about my work. And within that context, I actually sort of said, you know, obviously my work's all about listening to music, and if you have dementia, bringing joy to your journey of dementia with music. But one way to go real deep with it is to actually sing. And so then I invited some friends of mine. This was the big reveal and the big surprise. So every 2 weeks, I go and sing with a choir at a local care community here called St. Luke's, and they all have dementia in varying stages. And so there's actually 2 choirs. The first one is kind of like a respite choir. So they come in from home with their care partners. And then the other one are full-time care. So they are there with the nursing staff. But we put them together, and we brought them all out onto the TED stage. And then I invited the audience to sing with us. And I kind of said, the whole point here is, if we all do this together, if we let go of our inhibitions, sing loudly and just let it go, we're all gonna feel the feels. And so they started singing Blue Moon, which was awesome. And that became, we kind of did it as a round. So you had Blue Moon underneath, and then over the top, they started singing, again, the last bit of surprise, because the whole audience is singing Blue Moon. And then half of the choir would go, always look on the bright side of life, over the top of it.
Amazing.
And that was their final message. And then we kind of brought the whole thing down and sort of sung that line nice and slow at the end. And we were the first standing ovation of the day. I was in tears, and so were most of the audience. And so it was really beautiful. And we just had an amazing kind of moment. I'm curious to see how the magic will sort of transferred onto the recording, if it can be or not, because it was certainly magic to be in the room. Yeah, we got incredible feedback from it. So it was, for many people, it was their favorite talk of the whole day, which was out of 20 different talks.
Wow.
So yeah, I was really, really happy with how it went. And I'm excited to see what happens when it becomes public, and just, you never know, it might be a nice awareness piece for what we're all trying to do, and hopefully give some good advice to people.
Oh my gosh, yes. I know when you shared that, I got goosebumps, and I think it will translate well. Absolutely. I think people are going to be really excited to see that, and to see that choir come together at the end. I mean, it just speaks to what you're trying to do, which is how powerful and therapeutic music can be to heal, right? You know, it's like that representation of that. So
Well, and one of the other interesting parts of that day was, you could imagine having 25 people with varying levels of dementia backstage. And I don't know, I'm sure you've probably done quite a lot of this, Nicole, but if you've ever worked in any sort of show business, there's an expression called hurry up and wait, which basically means things can happen kind of quickly, but most of the time you're sitting around waiting, and it can be really, really boring, even if you are quite, able and don't have dementia. And so we had them there for almost 2 hours in the green room. And some people were starting to get confused about where they were and, a little bit unsettled. And at one point we started to have an escalation of some agitation, put it that way. And so the cure, though, was in the green room. I just sort of said to the musical director, I said, I think we need to start having a little bit of a song. And so we sung things like You Are My Sunshine, and we're trying to keep it down. I had to lock the door because it was all of the sound was streaming out into the backstage for the talks before us. But music cured everything backstage. It was also this hidden little story of the day that it held everybody together and grounded everybody back into where they were, united everybody. And we just, the people who were running that green room were just kind of, in tears before the talk even started, watching all of this unfold. But yeah, it was quite incredible. Wow. So yeah, I'm really happy. I'm also happy it's over because it was a lot of work and a lot of stress.
Yeah, lots of, leading up to that, I'm sure. Well, thank you for that backstory. I love to hear things like that. And when you can see, again, just the power of that and the science behind, when we look at this relationship with music and long-term memory, which is what you were tapping into with the people that were there, how do you explain and what are the ways that we can dive deeper into understanding that and how Vera leverages that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I suppose going back to the start of our talk where I was talking about playing music as a teenager for my grandfather, I could see something was happening. I didn't realize what it was, and I had no idea why, but I now do. And it's quite remarkable. And so I suppose this is a good opportunity to talk about what's actually happening in the brain when we do play music. And particularly what happens to someone who is living with dementia when we play the right music for them. So I suppose take the first part first. For all of us, every sound that we hear is triggering an emotional response. So that's why if you live in a city, you'll find that over time you can get stressed, like you're hearing all sorts of sounds and your brain and your body is trying to work out if it's a threat or if it's safety. And there's so many different things going on that, it's stressful, but it's also like a lot of work for your brain and for your subconscious. You go into nature and go for a walk through the bush. And, here in Australia, I did this on the weekend. We call it forest bathing in my family. We just go for a bath in the forest. But we soak up the natural sounds and you feel calm and relaxed and reset. And so music is obviously a collection of sounds, but it's a combination that we experience in our brain in a particular way. And if you think about it, sound is just vibration that hits our ear. But then those vibrations go through our auditory system. They actually cross the hemispheres. So we're interpreting a lot of what we hear on the right ear in the left brain and vice versa. And it's actually a full brain workout. So if you look at anyone listening to music in an fMRI scan, something like that, it's like Christmas lights turning on. So, and this happens to all of us. That's why we all feel this kind of element of pleasure, but it's also because it's stimulating the brain and it's re-coordinating the different parts of the brain. It's why you'll find that when you go for a run and you listen to music, you can elevate your performance. Your brain is just kind of switched on and enabling you to do that physical activity a little bit better. Even certain sounds can help distract parts of the brain or occupy them so we can focus and, or sleep. And so there's all of these different things going on. But suffice to say, the thing I want to land is that what we interpret as music is actually many parts of our brains having to work together to interpret things like the rhythm, the timbre, the pitch, the key, the words, if there are lyrics. All those things kind of have to kind of come together for us to then experience what we call music. And when somebody is living with dementia, unfortunately, we're seeing a reduction in brain activity and a reduction in coordination between the different parts of the brain, a reduction in their ability to even use fine and gross motor skills or be able to talk or remember. So you can imagine that if we start to play music and we get the brain firing up and coordinating, then we're starting to almost like jumpstart a car. Like we're putting electricity back into all of the circuits. And particularly if we can stimulate a long-term memory with a song that that person knows from their past, then that sets off a chain reaction that really stimulates the whole brain. So that's kind of what we try to do as a company. We call it precision music. So precision music is defined as music that's personalized to the individual, but that can also shift their neurological state. And so for someone with advanced dementia in particular, that is music that is normally they would have recognized from when they were 15 through to 35. As they progress in their journey, we try to look at going earlier and earlier in their life. And if you think about that stage of your life, your kids weren't alive. And if they were, they weren't listening, like they were young. Yeah. You know what I mean? So often we find the kids come in and go, oh, I know what my parents loved. And we're like, that's great. And let's play that. And obviously they probably will remember a lot of that music. But do you know what they were listening to when they were a teenager? And they're like, no. And cool. Well, we can work that out in just a couple of minutes with Vera. And let's see if they'll recognize that music. And it's always this kind of really magical moment where Vera starts to play music from that earlier period in that person's life. And then they start to recall all these memories that particularly their kids have never heard of because they weren't alive then. And all these memories that are attached to music are still there in their memory. So that's the science of what we're trying to do. We're trying to sort of find long-term memories, musical memories, stimulate them. And then when that person is in that stimulated state, try to then deliver care. And so we kind of think of it as music first. Like if we can engage with the music first, get them into a really great state of enjoyment, smile on their face, tapping their foot, and then say, okay, it's time for hygiene care. Let's see if we can get up and hop into the shower or something like that. It's going to be far more joyful. You might even be able to convince them to dance in than if they were very unmotivated to get up and perhaps unsure of where they were and maybe not in a state to really support the caregiver on performing that care. But yeah, we see applications throughout the ADLs. So people who struggle to eat, put on music first. You'll find, again, with stimulating the brain, it is improving their ability to use fine and gross motor skills. So being able to pick up the food, chew the food, swallow the food, all these things are enhanced. And we're seeing really big applications in the hospital partners who are using music for that particular part of the day. But yeah, administering medication, getting out of bed, getting changed, exercising, calming down for the day, sleeping, you name it, music can support the person throughout the day. And it's really up to that caregiver to determine when and where it's going to be most impactful.
Yeah. And how do you discover that with the personalization with the person living with dementia? Is it based on, gathering some of that info on their age and the music that they listen to at that time and then pairing it based on those different ADLs that you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, that's right. So in simple terms, what's actually happening in the background of Vera, you'll find Vera is very, very simple on the front. It's only got 3 modes. So one is relax, one is energize, and one is reminisce. And so relax is really great if someone's feeling agitated or if we're trying to keep a calm environment in the afternoon. And energize is great if you're trying to do something like a hygiene routine or exercise or get someone up in the morning, motivate them to do something. And then reminisce is awesome for just spending time and conversing and talking about the songs, talk about the memories the songs evoke. But how we get those songs is actually, it sounds simple, but it's a lot of work. So
I'm sure.
First of all, we've licensed millions of songs. So we've gone out to where I used to work, Universal Music Group, and we've done a partnership there to license the catalogs. And then we've gone and looked at all of those songs, there's millions of them, and we've assessed where they were popular and when. And so this has been the real secret sauce. So we've looked at things like chart data or radio plays, which were really, really indicative, tours, things like that. And then when we ask the person and we say, okay, where were you born? When were you born? And the most important question, where were you living from the age of 15 to 35? That's when that musical taste was being formed. Now, if we know those bits of information, and we also ask their first language, if we know those bits of information without knowing anything about their musical taste, we can work out what were the popular songs around them as they grew up. Because don't forget, most people who are living with dementia are probably over 60. That's not everybody, of course, but as a general, majority. And for them, go back 60 years, people didn't have CDs or cassettes. They might have had records at home, but if they did, they'd have to be very, very wealthy to have more than 10. And so most of what they were really exposed to from a popular music perspective was what was on the radio. And so that information we have. And so we can find those songs that were popular on the radio for that person in that country at that time. And that's normally a really great place to start. And then from there, the caregiver can give a thumbs up or a thumbs down, just like something like Pandora.
Right?
And
That's so good.
yeah, and tune things in and go, okay, they do recognize that song and they enjoy it, or they don't. And then we keep learning and going down the rabbit hole. Now, of course, you can shortcut that by adding favorite artists if we know them and adding favorite genres if we know them, but you don't have to. And sometimes, unfortunately, some of the people we work with, their families aren't engaged anymore in their care, and we've lost that information and they can't recall it for themselves. So sometimes we do start with much more of a blank slate, but with a little bit of effort and spending time together, we very quickly work out what music they did love and what music is going to be useful in a therapeutic sense. And then once it's dialed in, then it's up to the caregivers then to, as you say, start just integrating it into the ADLs. And best practice is that you put it on before each type of care every day. Sometimes that's possible, sometimes it's not. We find in some of our partners that have many, many, many people in their care, sometimes they'll just identify one or two cares throughout the day that they want to focus on per person, depending on their staffing levels. But it really depends case by case. But we're working towards just making it easier and easier and easier to have the music on most of the day. And I should stress that every now and then, probably I'd say it's 1 in 50 people on average, or 1 in 100, we find someone who doesn't like music, and that's okay. So it's not for them, but the vast majority of people, it has an incredible benefit.
It does. Well, and I had a couple thoughts about just even from the caregiver perspective, how enjoyable it is for them to be doing all of those things and incorporating music. And also the ease of use is incredibly helpful. I know that there are other platforms that offer music, right, that we can play. And in our conversation before, it was so interesting when you had shared, and I'll have you reshare about why not some of those other go-to music platforms. As you explain it, it makes so much sense why we need something like this, the ease of use, the ability to have multiple people utilizing the platform at a time.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because when we go into aged care communities, we either find that they already know the power of music and are doing everything they can to try to utilize it throughout the day and are just coming up against problem after problem, or they also do know about it, but they've kind of given up and they just bring in a community musician maybe once a week for a concert or something like that. That's normally what we walk into. And the other part that we walk into is an audio environment that's normally, unfortunately, full of distress. Like it's you can hear people kind of sometimes calling out down the hall, or other people who are stuck on a particular word and that's annoying other people. And, you just start to feel the tension bouncing off the different sort of audio signals around the site. And so we kind of listen to that and we go, okay, we can address some of these things. And what we find is for the people who are doing the best to use music, they might be using something like YouTube on the TV and they're getting ads, and that's not good for everybody. But also they'll be playing generic 60s playlists and That's great. It's better than nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And they're doing that in a group setting. But those 60s playlists are very much based on one person's kind of journey, normally someone who's living in that country. So in your case, just someone who grew up in America through the 60s. Great. Okay,
Right.
that's good for them. But what about the people in the room who maybe grew up in China or Italy or France, and
Mm-hmm.
who, for them, this music may not be relevant culturally or may not even be music they recognize? So the other thing we find is that if they've been trying to deploy personalized music, they've probably used something like a Spotify or an Apple Music. And what they'll typically find is that they need email addresses, first and foremost, to
Mm-hmm.
set up a personalized account. And then they also are going to need to have a device for each person. It starts to get expensive. And we've walked into scenarios where they've actually gone and set up like 50 different email addresses for everyone in their care, and they've tried to set up all these accounts, and it started to pile up on terms of
Mm.
cost. Plus they then have to actually spend a lot of time working out what playlists to use, and they end up quite often just using the generic
All
60s
right.
playlist.
Yeah.
So
I
you
can't
kind of go down
imagine managing all of those. I mean, that would be so much. Yeah.
no, that's it. And so the result for those customers of ours who've gone down that rabbit hole is
Mhm.
they put in all this effort only to kind of come to a very generic solution. So when we were first doing our research, we worked with a partner like this, and we kind of said to them, well, tell us about the problems. Like, what do you need in a solution? And they said, well, first and foremost, we need to be able to create profiles for the people in our care without email addresses.
Mhm.
We also need to be able to archive them in case they're here for respite and they're going to go home and then come back. Or if they do pass away, we're going to need to move that profile on so we can make room for the person who's going to take their room. And we also need all of this to be able to be automated. Like, we don't have time to work out what music to play. We just want to hit play.
Yeah.
And it would be great if the music could be oriented around the ADLs in particular, but also how that person is feeling and how we want them to feel. And so that was kind of what we took away to create Vera Pro. And Vera Pro is designed for those, basically any caregiver who has multiple people in their care. And so within one device and one experience, they can switch from one person to the next as they go and perform care. And so this became quite, dramatically picked up. So we kind of found as we walked into different care communities, whether they were using music or whether they'd kind of given up on it, they all recognized that, oh my gosh, this makes it really, really easy.
Mm.
The thing that we've actually just released is called group listening. So to combat that example I experienced, I was explaining earlier with playing YouTube, the generic playlist. So
Mhm.
group listening just allows the caregiver to open up a new setting within Vera Pro, and they can tick the exact people who are in the room. So there might be 5 people, it might be everybody, and then hit play on a certain type of music that they want. Maybe it's relaxing music. And it will go and find the music that those people have in common and that we know that they'll all enjoy. And it puts it together into a homogenized experience. And so we've just released that, and that's we're getting lots of great feedback about that as well. And we're constantly looking for other ways that we can enhance things. So I think down the line, probably one of the things we'll do in the new year is a smart TV app, so that
Mhm.
it's really easy to play Vera from any device that's a smart TV, because we recognize they're everywhere. Whereas at the moment, most of the time, people are needing to use a phone or an iPad with a Bluetooth speaker, and that does create a little bit of friction and complexity.
Mhm.
So we
Mhm.
think the smart TV app will be huge. But yeah, we're always looking for ways to just add more value to our customers and make it easier and easier to integrate music. So always open to ideas.
Oh my goodness. The group to be able to pull the different profiles is so cool. Oh my gosh. As my listeners can't see me, but as you were sharing that, I was like, oh my gosh. Yes. Having worked in senior living communities, I would have given anything to have had this to be able to easily pull music for my people, So, huge, huge benefit in so many different ways. So, and yeah, the smart TV app, absolutely. That's a great idea. That's a great idea. As a lot of the common areas, have
Yeah.
those TVs, and that would be an easy way to do that. And you had also shared with me about some of the data you had collected with the increase of quality of life and what you saw as a result of that. I'd love for you to tell us more about that.
Yeah, I mean, as I was mentioning, we were learning all this while we did research.
Mm-hmm.
And so that research we did during the pandemic. It was actually, as someone who's trying to build a product, the pandemic made things very difficult. So
Yes.
we had a prototype for Vera, which when we originally designed it, we actually thought that it should be designed for one caregiver to look after one person who needed care.
Right.
So we were thinking of the at-home
In
market.
home. Mm-hmm.
And as we kind of started getting into that, we started to learn a lot about that too. One of our first users actually said, "Well, where's my playlist?" And we said, "Oh
Mm.
no, it's the music's for your husband because we're trying to find memories from his past." And she said, "Well, that's great, but I want to listen to some music too. And
Mm.
don't I count?" And we were like, "Oh yeah,
Right?
that's really interesting."
Mm-hmm.
So we kind of had to rethink the at-home experience a little bit. We're still doing a lot of work on this at the moment, but and thinking of it being a bit more like an entertainment service for everybody in the family, but a way to reconnect, especially with things like group listening coming through. That's kind of opening up this idea that actually everybody should have a profile and they should be enjoying common music. So that was really interesting. But when we won some funding here in Australia where the company was founded to go and do research, and so we worked with a senior living community for that. And that was where they were starting to tell us all these problems they were having with the other music services. And ours didn't at the time solve the problems, because we were doing the same thing. We were like, well, we need an email address and there's only one carer per, per
Right.
person
Yeah.
in care. But they were telling us all the things that it needed to be, and we listened. And but while we were doing that, we were doing this research, and we used something called the DemQual proxy to evaluate quality of life in a before and after. And on average, we shifted quality of life by 17% in 2 weeks. And so for us, being relatively naive, we kind of said, well, is that any good? And and we got told that if this were a pharmaceutical drug trial
Yeah.
and you'd shifted someone's quality of life by 17% in just 2 weeks, this would be front of the New York Times and we'd be talking, billion-dollar contracts, blah, blah, blah. And so we went, okay, that sounds encouraging.
That's really good.
So,
Yeah. Oh, so
so
encouraging.
we proceeded. I think that was even before we'd started the company. We were
Mm.
still playing around with, what the product should be and trying to validate that there was, this was a company that needed to be formed. But it was incredible. And we're doing research at the moment with a hospital here in Sydney, clinical study. We're trying to evaluate the reduction in anxiety, agitation, basically the symptoms of dementia, the behavioral symptoms. And then we are just trying to fund a few studies in the US. So we're working with University of Chicago, Berkeley School of Music, and then in the UK, we're working with Oxford. So there's a bunch of stuff that's coming down the pipes in terms of research with our tools. But we really, actually, there's probably one of the other real big benefits of creating a scalable digital deployment, which is what Vera is. It enables researchers to actually have a consistent approach to music delivery for their studies. Because if you think about trying to research, the impact of personalized music on somebody, there have been many studies on it, but most of the sample sizes aren't huge because there's no way to consistently deliver that and bring all the information back. And so Vera we're starting to get a lot of inquiry and support from the research community going, oh, this is actually going to help us actually answer a lot of the questions we've been trying to answer. So that's exciting too.
That's exciting. I can't wait to see how this grows. So many good things. And in our conversation, you and I had talked about kind of that headspace moment and, the therapeutic side of the digital world. Tell us more about that concept. We both are not doom and gloom. We'd shared that. We're like, we want to give people hope. We want to encourage them.
Absolutely. I think that's something that we try to push in all of our marketing is positivity. It is obviously quite tragic to be given the diagnosis of a form of dementia, whichever it may be. But it doesn't mean that there can't be many moments of joy. And, some people can live out a perfectly happy and wonderful life despite it.
Yeah.
And so in any situation, music generally is going to be a big help, and it's going to make the day much more joyful, not just for the person who's on their journey with dementia, but also for their caregivers. And I suppose to reference Headspace, when we started out, we looked at it from a marketing perspective, and we were trying to break down the business and the opportunity and look at some of the challenges. And one of those we identified was that most people don't really believe in the power of music. We all still, as a general population, we think of it as entertainment. And even though probably many people are using music to run faster when they go for a jog, or they're using music to, soothe themselves from a breakup in an emotional way, sometimes leaning into the emotion and playing sad music, or trying to circumvent it with happy music, whichever way you want to go. And so we kind of all instinctively do it, but don't really acknowledge it. And one of the aha moments for us was, well, look what Headspace did to meditation. So before they came around, meditation obviously existed. It was practiced. It was a very niche kind of idea that had plenty of clinical evidence to support how it could improve wellness. But even the idea of wellness wasn't really something that we spoke about much in the public vocabulary.
Right.
And
no, it's so true.
And again, if you went down the main street and spoke to people about meditation 10 years ago and just said, hey, well, would you ever do it? Do you think that it works? What are the benefits? Most people would say, well, that's for hippies. And I don't know, they wouldn't have had a lot of faith in it. But Headspace made it really easy for everyone to try, made it deployable and scalable. And suddenly, fast forward to today, it's a very common practice for someone to say, oh, I'm just going to go and meditate on my lunch break, or I meditated this morning, or gee, I've hit a streak of 10. It's commonplace. Yeah. It's understood, it's accessible, and it's believed, right? And so for music therapy and for using music in this therapeutic sense, we kind of want to do the same. And it's why things like that opportunity to speak at TED are really important, and even to come on your show and just to spread that awareness to people that there's a lot more here than you realize. And if everybody starts to understand that more and more, we actually can have an incredible change, not just for people with dementia, but throughout the entire healthcare sector. I actually have a dream that one day you'll be able to go into hospital with any health condition, and based on what the hospital knows about you, your age, where you were born, what problem we're treating you for, maybe a few other characteristics, they'll come along with their medical health record to maybe deliver you a meal, and they'll just hit play. And within that experience, music that that you enjoy, that's suitable for that particular setting is going to play for you. And we're going to fill the halls of these hospitals with lovely music, maybe sometimes in a group sense, maybe not. But going back to that point I raised earlier about when we first go into a site and the audio environment's quite distressing, when we go back in after a month or two of them using Vera, normally it's quite calm. And there's normally some form of music either being played for an individual somewhere, or it's being played in the group setting. And it's quite a lovely environment to walk back into. And that can happen throughout the entire healthcare system. Because if you think about a hospital at the moment, it's really hard to get well in there. It's like beep, beep, beep all night long, lights flashing everywhere.
Right.
It's
the sound triggers so much.
Yeah, that audio environment, as I mentioned, it's like it's impacting you every single second of the day, no matter where you are. What you hear matters. And so, I do see an incredible opportunity in the future for the healthcare system to know the music you love. And the healthcare system to be able to play that music for you along your entire journey of life, from the moment you're born to the moment that peacefully pass in palliative care. And I think that's really the ambition of what we try to do at Music Health.
Thank you. And I'm dreaming that with you. We will all be your supporters in that. I think it would be just this beautiful vision of bringing that joy, memories, connection, supporting our health, our mental health, our physical health. So many ways that music ties us together. So I believe it'll be mainstream. I do. And the momentum is there. And the data, right? Now you have a way to capture the data. Where can we learn more? Where can we connect with you? How can we support you and what your initiatives are? And a free trial I know is offered with what you do. So we'd love to give people all of the information of ways to be able to work with you.
Oh, absolutely. I think the best place to go is www.veramusic.com. So VERAMUSIC. And that, as you said, that'll give you information about what Vera is, but it can also direct you to a free trial. The apps are available on Android and iOS, Apple. And then if you want to hear more about the Music Health Mission, or if you're interested in perhaps volunteering or even getting a job with us, go to musichealth.ai. And that's our company website. So they're probably the main places to go, and you'll be able to sort of find your way from there, depending
Yeah.
on what you're looking for.
So good. Thank you. And we'll look for your TED Talk. It'll probably hopefully be out by the time this airs, and we'll get to see that and all of the good things that are happening. Thank you so much. I
No,
even learned more about you this conversation, which was so fun. So thank you for being here. Thank you for joining me.
thank you, Nicole. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening today. If you enjoyed our episode, please subscribe and give us 5 stars. In all honesty, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for listening to our episode.